That is indeed the point, isn't it? You can clap if you want. That's fine. That is good stuff. And that's really what we've been talking about for quite some time. Probably since the beginning of the year, we've been hitting pretty hard this idea of living what we believe. We started, March and April, somewhere in there, talking about the Lord's, the disciples, our prayer. And we focused on this main point and how all of it flowed out of this main point, and really how all of our Christian life flows out of this main point, where he says, hallowed be your name. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. And we talked about how that was not some nice, flowery platitude. Oh, gee, God, we hope you're happy and we hope everybody loves you. It is a commitment that says, when I speak those words, when I say, hallowed be your name, not only is that my heart's desire, but that is my heart's goal, to make your name holy, to make your name respected, to make your name revered in this world by being obedient to you, by living your life, and by letting others see the goodness of you, the holiness of you in my life. So that when they see my life, they will say, God is real and God is good, because I see it in them. Church doesn't happen inside these four walls. Church happens when we leave. If all the church you have is what happens on Sunday morning between 10 and 11:15 or 11:20, we are severely missing the point. We went from there into looking at written on the heart. And we found there the point, the focus, that God's words are words of life. They're words of life that are strong enough for us to stand on. They're words of life that are good and that are real, and that when you line them up against all the philosophy and all the wisdom of this world from the beginning of time, especially to what is out there right now that this world says leads to happiness, God's word is the only thing that is worth trusting. The only thing that is real, the only thing that is good, the only thing that truly affirms life and gives life. And we talked about that Jesus is the Word. We kind of used that last week as we transitioned into what we're going over this week, as we begin going over something new this week, the 10 sayings. And let me just give you a snippet here real quick, and then we're going to change gears. I would encourage you to go to a Jewish service. Eileen, where was that one that we went to? What was the name of that place? Karen, do you remember? Michelle? At the Dell Jewish Community, yeah. Okay. The point is that when we went, and it was this beautiful service of worship in song for the most part. After it was over, we got to go up front and talk to the rabbi. And he had a scroll, the Hebrew scroll. And we asked him about the 10 commandments and just for a snippet of what they think, what he thinks of them. And the first thing he said was, well, we don't think of them as commandments. We don't call them the 10 commandments. We call them the 10 sayings, which is where this series gets its name. The 10 sayings. Because the Jews don't see the commandments the way we see them. Do this, don't do that. As Gerald mentioned, drive 62 and get a ticket. That's the way we see commandments and law. That's not how they saw commandments and law. They saw it as, this is God's wisdom. This is God's gift to us to learn what real life is. These are things to pay attention to and to listen to so that we know how to live right and well and good and joyfully. So we're going to be looking at the 10 commandments, the 10 sayings in the weeks to come. And we're going to try to be very, very practical with them. With the Written on the Heart series, we were pretty conceptual. And last week we were pretty conceptual, and we're going to stay conceptual one more week, and then we're going to get really practical. But what we're doing in this last week of conceptual preaching here is laying a foundation. Laying a foundation that is strong enough to build our lives on. Laying a foundation that is firm and deep and good and can withstand not just the storms of life, but all the temptations, grand and subtle. And all of the selfishness that simply resides in the way we are wired. So today we begin the search for the saying of all sayings. And I'll let you in on a little secret. The idea was that the first commandment would be the saying of all sayings. The first commandment being, that's the Shema, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Silly people, that came after the 10 Commandments. The first commandment being, no, that's the Shema, people. That came right after the 10 Commandments. We just said that. There we go. It's right there on your order of worship. There we go. There we go. So that's all we're going to get of the sayings for today. We're going to move on and do something conceptual. Because as I was putting this together, there were so many rabbits to chase. And you know, rabbits taste a lot like chicken. And they're just really good. And I wouldn't say I got distracted. What I'm saying is the sermon was 6 hours long, and I'm trying to be nice. So we're going to split it up into a couple of sermons, and they're not going to be 3 hours each, so please don't worry about that. But as we begin looking at the saying of all sayings, this idea of I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Just get that idea and think of the context under which that was written. 400 years of slavery. Now I'm getting into next week's sermon. But being pulled out of that in such miraculous ways, being delivered into a land full of milk and honey, being cared for, watching the waters open wide, and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people walking across dry land with walls of water on either side, protected by this one Yahweh God. So when they heard this command at the base of the mountain, with the clouds enveloping it and this voice coming out of the clouds saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. With reverence and awe, they could say, yes, you are. But before we dig in too deeply, I want to recap and actually dig a little bit deeper into what we began last week in the sermon focus and talk about the beginning of the Shema. You remember the Shema, which a couple of you have repeated? Begins with 6 beautiful words in the Hebrew. I'm going to butcher them, but I'm going to try them again. Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Anahun Elohim, that's one word, Yahweh Echad. The Shema was central to the Israelites' faith, central to their understanding of their God and their place with God. It was a part of their morning prayer and evening prayer every day of their life. And literally translated, it meant Yahweh, the name of God, which, by the way, can be extracted a meaning of the existing one. The one who continues, the one who is and continues, the one who is existing and never ceasing. Yahweh, our God, the Hebrew says. Yahweh alone. And in that context, after having passed through the Red Sea on dry ground and watching God destroy their enemy without them lifting a military weapon at all, being taken care of in the desert, fed, protected, delivered, redeemed, rescued. They could repeat, we know this is our God. We are community with Him. He has chosen us. He loves us. We are His and He is ours. And in His overwhelming holiness and power, there is none other like Him. He is Yahweh alone. How incredibly intense and focused that verse is. And how beautifully it echoes the first commandment. I am the Lord your God. I am Yahweh, your God. I brought you out of Egypt from the land of slavery. I fear that in the past when I read that first commandment, I read it almost as a correction to spoiled children. Listen up, this is what I've done for you. I don't believe that anymore. I am Yahweh. I am the existing one. I did this because I love you. What a different spin that puts on God's commands, on His wisdom and sayings. And the Shema was given after the retelling of the story. Not the first time when they went through and escaped from Egypt by God's powerful hand, but after they had been in the desert for 40 years, and after God had fed them, and after He had put up with all their whining, and after He had put up with everything that they did well and did wrong, God's love never gave up on them. Tested perhaps, but never gave up. And as they were about to enter the promised land, after 40 long years wandering in the desert, we get upset when our AC is out. For a day or 2 days, or how long have y'all been without AC? A week and a half. I mean, they've been without AC for a week and a half. And we all really want to say, oh, but I just said we get upset when our AC's out. So we don't want to say that because, the preacher said we can't say that no more. They didn't have first world problems. They were wandering in the desert for 40 years. Hot. Desert means there's not a whole lot of water. Probably not a whole lot of shower. Is it? It's nasty. And yet they knew that He was leading them. They knew that they were in the desert for 40 years because of their own failure of faith. And this new generation that He was ushering in, Moses recited the 10 Commandments for them, reminding them of the situation that brought them there, that brought them to those sayings. And said, these are your sayings. And through the Shema, He says, these are not just your sayings, your commandments, but those for generation after generation after generation. These are our sayings from God. And as He begins that Shema, it's called a Shema because Shema is the first word in the Hebrew, translated hear. We talked last week about how that word hear is so rich for the Israelite, for the follower of God, for us too. It is much more than simply, well, listen to this, or hey, get your ears ready. It is more of a statement that says it is imperative that you get this information. Here comes the really important stuff. Hear and understand so that you can hear and obey, so that you can hear and live, so that you can write this on your heart and you can become this. To hear included the idea of studying and comprehending and putting things together as if things are coming from many different places and placing together the model that was designed. Make these things whole and complete, and then make them real in your life. So when he said, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God," they knew exactly what he was saying. They had heard the stories of their rescue from slavery, of passing through the Red Sea, of the 10 plagues in toto. They had seen him feed them and take care of them for 40 years in the desert. They knew that they belonged to one another and that they belonged to him and that he loved them and was present and active among them. And when he said, "The Lord is one, Yahweh alone," they knew that what he was saying was, there is none other like him. We depend on him because we know we can depend on him. We depend on him because we know that he is life. We trust in him and him alone, because wisdom from this world does not measure up to wisdom from the mouth of God. There is no other God, no other reality, no other anything that has any authority in comparison to our Yahweh God. And there is only one Yahweh God. And we will follow him, we will obey him, we will hear him, and we will focus on him. That's where we should be on our best days too, right? So now let's move into this week. And we're going to dig a little bit deeper. That was all from last week. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into this idea of here. And so I want you to do something with me. I want you to put your hands and fists. Go ahead. This is audience participation. Okay? Go like this, on top of each other, like you're hammering or whatever. And sing with me. The wise man built his house upon the rock. Good. The wise man built his house upon the... Dance if you want. The wise man built his house upon the rock, and the rains came a-tumbling down. Oh, the rains came down and the floods came up. The rains came down and the... Little faster now. The rains came down and the floods came up, but the wise man's house stood firm. The foolish man built his house upon the sand. The foolish man, I like to go like this, house upon the sand. The foolish man built his house upon the sand, and the rains came a-tumbling down. Faster now. The rains came down and the floods came up. The rains came down and the floods came up. The rains came down as the floods came up, and the foolish man's house went. So, now listen to this. You have to hear and follow this one. So, build your house on the word, Jesus Christ. Build your house on the word, Jesus Christ. Build your house on the word, Jesus Christ, and the blessings will come down. Keep listening. Oh, the blessings come down as obedience goes up. The blessing goes down as... There we go. The blessings come down as obedience goes up. So build your house on the word, Jesus Christ. I got lost there. I got so into it. You guys were great. Wow, we should record that and whatever. Okay. Now, why sing that silly little song? Who can tell me who wrote the words to that song? Jesus. Very good. I always love asking questions like that because you see people going, I should know this. And then somebody's going, it's in the Bible, right? Is he trying to trick us? Okay, where is it found? In the gospel somewhere, right? If Jesus said it, right? Where? I love this. Yeah, you do. The end of the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is that beautiful thing that we love that starts out with the Beatitudes. And then talks about how we're the salt and the light. Then talks about how Jesus is the fulfillment of the law. And then he gives various laws that redefine laws. The spirit of the laws. The meaning of the sayings. You don't have to physically murder someone to be guilty of murder. You can hate them. You can wish them ill. You don't have to physically commit adultery to betray your spouse. You can fantasize about another. And on he goes, giving several commands, several redefinitions, this is the spirit of the Word of God. And then he talks about prayer, the prayer that we studied for several weeks. Right in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount is, hallowed be your name. I don't think that's by accident. He talks about treasures in heaven, which will, by the way, be our benediction. And then he says, don't worry. And if we are people of faith, real faith, if indeed we believe that there is but one Yahweh, and that He is our God, that He has chosen us, that He loves us, that He is active and present among us, really, in all things, what is there to worry about? Because if God's got you back, I mean, seriously, what is there to worry about? No. The worst that can happen is that they kill you. And you just get to go home before the other people. Now, I don't mean to be flippant, but when faith becomes very, very deep, we can begin to see where he would say, don't worry about things of this earth, because it is the stuff of heaven that is worth living and dying for. And then he says, don't judge others. We have no right to, because in all reality, we deserve to be judged. And he says, ask, seek, knock. Inquire for the Lord's favor in the context of obedience, in the context of trust and faith. And as he wraps up, and I mean wraps up the Sermon on the Mount. Therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine, the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, right? And then there were 70 scholars that got together near New Testament times and rewrote it in Greek, when Greek was the language of, the written language of the day. It's called the Septuagint. It's Greek for 70. The 70 that translated it. The word used here in verse 24, everyone who hears these words of mine, Jesus says, talking about the Sermon on the Mount, is the same Greek word that is used in the Greek translation of the Old Testament in the Shema. The idea is the same. Hear these words. Make them a part of who you are. Understand them and obey them. Live them as God's child. Everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. Now, what strikes me as interesting here is it really doesn't take someone of a whole lot of wisdom to know that you really want to build your house on something sturdy. Right? You remember that little parable about the mustard seed? How big is that thing? Little bitty, 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 bitty. And it makes the biggest bush plant in the garden. So when God says you're wise if you build your house on His foundation, in my sarcastic youth minister days, I would have said, well, you're just not an idiot if you do it. I mean, congratulations for rising above idiocy and doing the smart thing and doing the oh duh thing, right? The wise man built his house on the rock. I mean, that's so of course. That's how good and rich and real God's Word is. That's what He's calling us to. I got you. Let me teach you. Let me lead you. Let me show you good. Let me introduce you to good, joy-filled living. The rain came down, the streams arose, the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. There's another duh statement. What an idiot. I mean, seriously, building your house on sand? When you compare the wisdom of this world to the wisdom of God, I mean, duh. This is also the same word, the same idea, the same importance as the word here in the Shema is also used in Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 9, verse 7. This is at the end of the Transfiguration when, good old Peter, I just love Peter. He speaks. I mean, he's just seen an amazing thing. Jesus is transformed in his very sight, and Moses and Elijah come to minister to Jesus. What a powerful moment. And he said, let's build 3 altars, one for each of these guys. This is incredible. I mean, Moses and Elijah, pillars of the Old Testament, pillars of the faith. We have learned what faith is through these men and through their lives and through their example. And then there's Jesus talking amongst them. And I mean, it really sounds reasonable what Peter wants to do. But we've read this story, so we know that he was just kind of being an idiot. But God's voice comes out of the cloud. It's kind of like the Ten Commandments did. Again, I don't think by mistake. I think very purposefully. And God says, "This is my Son, whom I love. Listen," it's the verb form of hear, "to him. Hear and follow him." And I got to tell you, that ain't the only place that happens. That same word is used in Revelation in the 7 letters to the 7 churches. He who has ears, let him hear. And it happens in Mark chapter 4, the parable of the seeds. It happens throughout the Gospels and Revelation. This idea of hearing and understanding and putting these things into life is so significant. So the point is that the saying of all sayings is what is most central to all of life. I am the Lord your God. I am Yahweh. I cared for you. I rescued you. And again, not in a, listen up here, you spoiled kids. It's my babies, my children, my beloved children. I'm Yahweh. I am with you. I exist. I am among you. And I have chosen you. In the Word that came to life, Jesus Christ, John chapter 1. Jesus, the living Word, knew, lived, and shared all the sayings of God. Because he was and he is and continues to be all the sayings of God. And when he was asked in Mark 12, from the reading today, which of God's sayings and laws, commandments, was the saying of all sayings, it's interesting that he didn't go to the first one in Exodus 20. He went to the Shema. Hear, Israel, the Lord is our God. He is the Lord alone. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength, which we talked about last week. Every part of your being is focused and committed to living his wisdom, living his life, understanding and incorporating who he is so that we might bring him honor, so that we might bring him glory. And the second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There's no commandment greater than these. In Matthew, when he answers this question, it's even a bit stronger in the language, in that all the law and all the prophets hang on these two. Without these two holding them up, they die. These two commandments give everything else breath and life. The point is, God is God, and we are joyfully his. And that means that we worship him because he is the God of all creation. He is the God of all wisdom. He is the God of all power. He is the God of all mystery. He is the God of all love. And we honor him by submitting to him, by listening to him, by fighting to understand him, and by being obedient to him and living him in this world to all others in this world. This is the Good Samaritan's lesson out of Luke chapter 10, which is Luke's version of the two greatest commandments. Who is my neighbor? This studious Israelite said after saying the two greatest commandments. And Jesus told him the parable of the Good Samaritan. We are to be God's continuing presence of rescue and redemption and hope and joy and fellowship. The point is, life with God is not life at all unless it is lived outside of these four walls. Life with God is not alive unless it is lived outside of these four walls with the purpose of blessing others in honor of the God we love, in response to the God who loved us. It is our way of not just honoring him, but for making his name hallowed. I hope this sounds very familiar. We've been over it and over it and over it. And to me, it is still amazing and fresh every time I dig into these pages. That the God of this universe loves us intensely and intimately. And he is present and active in our lives and in the life of this church family. And he has things for us to do, which he is preparing for us to do. And when we faithfully follow him out these doors and into this world and live his life, we humans, in our shallowness of wisdom, if we are smart, just smart enough to follow him and hear him, we can bring the God of all creation great glory. What a silly thing it is. What a silly thing it is to think that we bring a smile to God's face. And yet there may be no more blessed truth than we bring a smile to his face. He is our God. Him alone. If you need to respond to God's call, to his love, if you need to listen to him more deeply, whatever your need might be, as we stand and sing this song of encouragement and of challenge, come forward as we stand and sing. Stand and sing. Stand and sing. Stand and sing.